Okay, it's visible now.
Yes, sir.
Wait a minute. Okay. Okay. So I've come to the last module, theory of inflation. I have left out some parts of the classical macroeconomics like Say's law, the classical dichotomy, the Pigot effect. It has been decided that it will be covered in the next semester. Instead, I'm going to cover theory of inflation and finish up. I mean, one reason is that one of your seniors have taken has borrowed the books which have these discussions, and unfortunately, it's not available on the net also. So you won't have any material. Okay. Anyway, so let's start by inflation. Now, to some extent, I mean, inflation is something that I mean, even a non-economist will know what it is. It's a condition in which the prices are rising. Okay. Normally, what we do is, since there are many different types of commodities, we combine the different prices and form a price index. This index, if it goes on increasing, is called inflation. If we use prices of all commodities, we call it a headline inflation. Now, it can be seen that food prices, fuel items, they are particularly volatile. So you have different types of commodities. In some of them, their prices are change very rapidly. There are other commodities whose prices don't change, are fairly stable. Food prices and fuel items are considered to be very volatile in terms of price changes. So often what we do is we subtract the fuel and food inflation from the headline inflation. So what we get is called core inflation. Now, when we are talking about indices, the price can be measured in at different levels. For instance, you have the wholesale price, you have the consumer price index. Consumer price is the retail prices at which people like us, households, buy. And wholesale price index is the price at which the traders buy. Wholesale prices are supposed to be more stable than consumer price indices. Because we have transport costs, I mean, people try to, the number of intermediaries goes up, people try to make short term gains, and so on. You can create artificial shortages very easily. So, consumer prices are supposed to be more volatile than wholesale price. Another type of difference is relating to the commodities that we take. Again, I mean, this is pretty common sense that if you look at an agricultural laborer, he will generally consume certain commodities. I mean, again, there are some regional variations, but we can identify certain commodities which are common across region, or at least most of the people, most of the agricultural laborers consume. We can think of a urban commodities. Again, I mean, obviously, what you consume and what a slum dweller consume varies, and there are different dimensions. I mean, all of you in Bengal, for instance, we consume rice, but what type of rice we consume that can vary. But again, so what we have is we can roughly identify a block of commodities which are consumed by urban residents, and this forms the urban price index. So we can construct indices based on the some subset of commodities, or we can form indices based on at what level we are considering the prices, wholesale or retail. In India, we generally nowadays we calculate all the different types. If you check the newspapers about every month, or even if you just Google, you will see that you have different types of indices. So, I mean, the point that I'm making over here is perhaps not valid, but when we used index, when we talk about inflation, we generally, the policymakers generally refers to the wholesale price index. So obviously, this is not a very good index, but well, we also have the retail consumer price index, so we can also use that. Anyway, we are not concerned with policy. Now, is inflation good or bad? Is believed to be bad for various reasons. One is a lack of loss of purchasing power. I mean, again, it's very simple. If you have 1000 rupees and the price goes up, obviously your standard of living is going to come down. I mean, there was a story which I read long ago, not very good story, but a person he used to invest in the stock market, and he suddenly heard that the share of a particular company, which was almost zero at that time, maybe 1 rupee, 2 rupees, something like that, it would increase a million times after 50 years, 50 years, 100 years. So what he did was he sold all his whatever he had, he brought out all his money, and he put all his invested all his wealth in the shares of that particular company. And well, I mean, he wouldn't live for 100 years. So what he did was he went into the, I forget the English term, but in Bengali we call it himghum. He froze himself basically. He got the scientists to freeze him and also time the freezer in such a manner that he would be able to, he would automatically wake up after 100 years. And his plan was obviously that after 100 years he would become a, well, millionaire would be too small a term, billionaire, millionaire, something like that. And he would spend the rest of his life happily. So he brought the companies of the share, he invested it, he went into the sleep, and after 100 years he woke up and immediately ran to the nearest telephone booth. And he made a call to the share market. Someone picked up the phone. He asked, what is the price of this share? And the person quoted a figure which was way above what he had imagined, 10 times, 50 times over what he had imagined. He was delighted. He put down the phone, and then the bill came out, and the bill was for 100 billion rupees. So, I mean, the joke just shows that I mean, it's not enough to have money or assets. Prices are important, and if prices goes up, it doesn't. Your assets or money doesn't really mean anything. The second is problem with inflation is the redistribution of income. Income gets redistributed from certain groups of people. Certain groups of people gain while others lose. Now, who do you think is likely to lose from inflation?
So the ones who have money now,
The ones who have?
the ones who are rich for now, more money with them.
They have more money, so they lose more.
No,
No, I'm
because
afraid.
the prices rise,
Yeah,
তাহলে that amount of money will buy less of things.
yeah. But the poor person, he will become, his money will be or become almost zero. When I think of it in this way, what is your real income? It is M by P. So suppose prices become 2P. So what happens?
The
Your real income
lenders.
becomes half. M is not important over here. Yeah, someone was saying something. I think Arpan.
So
The lenders.
lenders.
Okay, how?
So when like if I'm a lender, I'm lending it out when there is no inflation right now. So
Okay.
my money value is like 100 maybe.
Hmm.
Then
I
maybe
pay you a 10% interest.
yeah, after 1 year the person is paying me back, but after 1 year there is an inflation. So though I'm getting 100 rupees only, but the money value has fallen because of the inflation. So in a way I'm losing. I'm not getting the 100 rupee which I lent it out a year ago.
Yeah, your real, the amount that you get back in real terms has fallen. Very good. So there are lenders who gain, sorry, who lose, and obviously the borrowers will gain, right? Because I'm paying back a lesser amount in real terms. Okay. Apart from that,
Fixed income earners, like who get pensions and all.
yeah, fixed income earners, rentiers. I mean, if you have rented out your house, if you are getting pension, so that means you're getting a fixed money in amount every month. So inflation means it's going to fall. What will happen to salary earners? In case of salary earners, generally what happens is every, at least in the, for instance, in the central government, uh, when you're earning a fixed salary or wage, sometimes the contract has a built-in clause for inflation. The built-in clause is that after every a certain period, in case of central government, for instance, every 3 months, the dearness allowance is hiked, and the amount that it will be hiked depends upon how much the price index has increased. So it is linked to the price index, to the inflation. So to some extent, salary earners are protected, but the problem is that I mean, even though there's such linking, I mean, obviously it has to be a formal wage contract. If it's not a formal wage contract, your employee will simply say that it's your bad luck that prices have gone up. So you have to have a formal contract. The West Bengal government, for instance, has frozen DA for the last 4 5 years. Even in the case of central government, in the last year, for instance, DA was frozen. So that means even though the price level was going up, the salary was not being increased. But to some extent, salary earners, wage earners, they are protected from inflation. Okay. If there's inflation, see, normally, I mean, if you go to the bank and withdraw money using your debit card, the maximum amount that you can withdraw is 20,000. So if there's inflation, this 20,000 will be spent quicker, more quickly. So maybe 10 days, you require 10 days to spend the 20,000. Now you spend it after 7 days. So that means you have to make more frequent withdrawals from the bank. And as you know from the money demand discussion of the money demand function, this will mean that the transaction demand is going up, and correspondingly the transaction cost, the cost of going to the bank, that increases. This is often referred to jokingly as the shoe leather cost, because you're traveling to the bank, the leather of your shoe gets eroded faster, is worn out faster. Next, you have something called a bracket creep inflation. I think it is better if I explain this using an example. Okay. Okay. So that means if you're earning an income between 0 to 10,000, you have to pay 10% as tax. If you're earning more than 10,000, sorry, there was an extra zero, I put an extra zero over here. Then for the first 10,000, you pay 10%. Anything above 10,000, you pay 50,000. Now, suppose you have there's a person whose income is 9,500. How much tax does he pay? He pays 950. Right? So, how much is his income? Well, anyway, I mean, you can do the mathematics. Now, we have inflation. And let us say we have the rate of inflation is very high. It goes up by, inflation is 10%. Let us say inflation is 10%. Sorry, 15%. Or anyway, let us keep it at 10%. And because the person is linked, his salary is also increased by 10%. So that means his salary goes up by 950. So what is his salary? If I take 500 from here, it is 10,450. Okay. So that means out of the first 10,000, he has to pay 1,000. And out of the second 450, he has to pay 4590. So this is his total tax, 1090. Okay, so what happens is when there's inflation, the person's income is increased, he goes up to a higher tax bracket, and his tax liability has gone up. As a result of this, he loses in two ways. See, as a result of inflation, he loses, but this is compensated by salary. The problem over here is salary goes up by 10%, but he has to pay a higher tax on it. So that means if you consider his real disposable income, that has gone down. If he's at the margin, he goes up to the next slab and he has to pay a much higher rate. It is 20%, not 10%. That is why he has to pay a higher amount. Bracket creep occurs only if you are near the margin of the tax slabs. If your income is 5,000, it's not a problem. You're still protected. Governments also don't like inflation because the tax revenue that they are collecting is in money terms. Therefore, if price level goes up, the real value of the tax revenue that falls. And in general, the volatility in prices generates uncertainty. And this can affect planning not only by the policymakers but also by individual agents. So that if the government introduces some policy, uh, it's not very clear how it will affect the people. Okay. Now, what are the causes of inflation? We distinguish between two causes. So, one is a demand pull inflation. The inflation occurs because the demand curve is shifting to the right. So this is the price, demand increases, the intersection occurs over here, price has gone up, demand increases again, price increases to this point.
Sir, could you show the previous slide once?
Okay, just give. Do you need the problem? No.
No, sir.
Okay, just let me see one thing. Okay.
Done, sir. Thank you, sir.
So you can see over here that if for some reason there's a sustained shifts in the demand curve, then the price level is going to go up. This is called demand pull inflation. The other is if the supply curve shifts. For some reason, maybe generally it's fuel prices, the supply curve shifts leftwards. So basically what we are seeing is you are willing to supply the same amount but at higher prices. Suppose oil prices goes up. That means transportation cost is going to go up. So previously you were willing to supply at this price level. Now if you want to supply the same amount, you have to cover the increased transport cost. So the supply curve shifts upward or rightwards. And again you can see this will lead to a cost push inflation. See, theoretically it's very easy to understand. You know what is a demand pull and cost push. And if the demand curve shifts, it's demand pull. If the cost curve shifts, it's cost push. But do we observe the demand curve and supply curves in reality? We don't. So it becomes very difficult to identify whether the inflation is of a demand pull inflation or whether it is a cost push inflation. And sometimes what can happen is they can also interact. So the demand rises, the cost, suppose the cost rises, there's cost push inflation, cost of certain commodities rises, the people who are, maybe the labor cost increases, right? The trade unions ask for higher wages. So then the supply curve will shift, you have cost push inflation. But if the workers are earning more, then they are going to demand more. So the demand curve is going to shift. So in this way, the demand pull and cost push inflation is theoretically very easy to distinguish, but in reality, it's much more difficult and they often take place simultaneously. Okay. We have another type of inflation, which is called markup. Can you hear me, by the way? I think I have some audio problems.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear?
You are also.
Okay. Okay. So markup inflation is that the producers first find out what is the average cost per unit. Then the price is set equal to a markup or a certain part amount above this average cost. Okay, I think someone is not muted. Yeah, it's better now. Okay. So what happens is we calculate the average cost. Suppose it comes to, let us say, 50, and then we charge 10% above this average cost, or it may be a lump sum amount. We will charge 5 rupees above this average cost. So if average cost increases to 60 and we are charging a 5 rupees markup price, the price will go up from 5 to 65. If the markup is in terms of percentage, 10%, average cost is 50, I'm going to charge 55. If it goes up to 60, I'm going to charge 66. So client had assumed that if we assume labor to be the only input, then the markup price will be something like this. M is the markup amount. WT into NT is the total cost. We are using N number of workers and we are paying each of them W amount. X is the amount produced. So total cost by 1 TT gives the average cost, and 1 plus M is the markup. So the producers decide on a particular value of M, and once they know what is W and X, they set the prices. So if there's an increase in wage cost, then the price of commodities will increase automatically. So this is called markup inflation. Okay. So this is important and you should know all these. You'll get more details in Ackley's book, Ackley's Macroeconomics. I'll share it with you, the relevant pages. But in inflation, the main discussion is around what we call the Phillips curve. Around the 1950s, the Phillips curves model was proposed, or rather it was put forward in a paper by A.W. Phillips. Subsequently, there were some theoretical discussions as to the underlying reason for this, and then there were criticism, modifications of this relationship. And this helped to formulate the theory of inflation. Now we can distinguish between 3 phases in these discussions. In the first phase, Phillips, A.W. Phillips and Richard Lipsey put forward the proposition that there is a stable negative relation between the rate of inflation and rate of unemployment. So that means if the rate of inflation is going up, the rate of unemployment will come down. If the rate of inflation is coming down, the rate of unemployment will increase. In the second phase, in which we have the works by Friedman, our old friend, and Phelps, they put forward the natural rate of unemployment hypothesis. This distinguishes between a short-run Phillips curve and a long-run Phillips curve. In the short run, they accepted the fact that there was a negative relation, but in the long run, they argued the Phillips curve was vertical. So in other words, the dot means it's the rate. So this is a short run Phillips curve. The long run Phillips curve is like this. Then we had the rational expectation school's criticism of the Phillips curve. That is no systematic trade-off between inflation and unemployment, which basically implied that even in the short run, the Phillips curve is vertical. Okay.
Sir, could you please show the previous slide once? Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Apart from these three phases, you will see just at the end that Friedman also talked about a fourth phase in which he argued that the relation was actually positively sloping. But this was in his Nobel lecture. But this is not an accepted part of economic theory. So I'll just mention it just as a curiosity. And there's another reason why I'll mention it. But that part is not important. So let's start from Phillips's paper. Phillips looked at, I've seen in the Google or in the textbook, various things about the identity of Phillips. In some parts you will see that he's a New Zealand economist from New Zealand. Some people have referred to him as an engineer. I don't know what the truth is, but I can assure you that I will not ask who Phillips was in my questions in the midterm or in some answers. So anyway, whoever Phillips was, he took data for Great Britain for the period 1861 to 1913. So how much? Almost 39, 42, 52 years of data. He looked at how the money wage was changing, the percentage change in money wage. So that is... And he looked at the change in unemployment. Okay. And he plotted the relation. So look, in the original formulation, you don't have prices. If you go back to the earlier slide, I have said that there's a negative relation between inflation and unemployment. So I should have prices over here. But when Phillips first postulated his curve, famous curve, he used wage rates. Prices came into the picture later on. And he found that there was a nonlinear. It was not a straight line, it was a curve. And there was a negative correlation between the two variables. You can see over here, these should actually be dots. But in the book that I have used, Frisch's book, he uses small letters to indicate that these are rates of changes. So W doesn't mean it's wage rate, it actually means it's the change in the wage rate. This is the change in unemployment rate. So it's negatively sloped. If the rate of unemployment goes up, the change in wage rate is going to fall. And second is, it's not a straight line, it's a curve. And you can see that it intersects at, Phillips found it intersected at roughly 5%. It should be 5.5 over here. Sorry, I missed it. The second part is that there's a cyclical loop in the counterclockwise manner, that if the rate of unemployment decreases as we are coming over here, as we are moving from a point like this to over here, the rate of unemployment is decreasing, right? No, sorry, I got it wrong. The rate of unemployment decreases. That means I'm starting from here and I'm moving leftwards. So as the rate of unemployment is falling, wage rate should increase. You can see from the curve that the increase in wage rate is occurring at by a faster amount. On the other hand, when we are moving down the curve, When we are moving down the curve like this, then the change in the wage rate is slower than the change in the rate of unemployment. Okay, if you don't understand this part, it's not very important. What you should know is there's a negative relation, it intersects at a point, and at this point, when the wage rate doesn't change, it is stationary. Phillips found that the rate of unemployment is 5.5%. This will have an economic meaning, which I'll come to later on. Now, the original element in Phillips's research was not the fact that there's a negative relation. That was something which economists had seen before. So if unemployment goes up, wage rate is going to come down. This is something which was known before Phillips. What is important is his contention that the relation between these two variables is stable. That is, over a long period of time, you have the same type of relationship. Okay, if I just see there's a negative correlation, what I'm basically saying is that today, 2021, suppose, sorry, the change in wage rate is 5, unemployment will change, will fall by, let us say, 2%. Okay. What Phillips was saying is that if I consider a different point of time, let us say 2030, and again, this goes up by 5%, this will again be minus 2%. The relation is stable. It's not, I'm not saying just this. What I'm saying is that the relation, the impact is stable over time. Okay. Phillips also said that the growth rate in money wages depends not only on U. U is unemployment, the level of excess demand for labor, but on the change in unemployment. So how much has unemployment changed over time? So the Phillips curve, if you want to write it in a mathematical formulation, the change in the wage rate is a function of the unemployment level and the change in the unemployment level over time. It depends on both the things. So the rate of change in the money wage rate will be above the average when unemployment is decreasing during boom periods. It will be below the average for the same level of unemployment when unemployment is increasing during recession. Sorry. It's more than 2 hours. Okay. Now, the Phillips curve was initially just an empirical relationship. Okay, he just said that these are two variables and these are related in this way. But he did not offer any explanation why they were related in this way. So the Phillips curve was a very good example of what Janning-Koopmans called measurement without theory. I mean, This is a book, 3 essays on the science of economics, which, I mean, if you're interested in economics, you can read it up. It's available on the net in LibGen. And well, we also have some hard copies. It's a very slim book, about, I don't know, 120, 150 pages, I think. Okay, so initially the Phillips curve was a measurement without theory. Then in the 1960s, after 2 years, Richard Lipsey put forward the most influential theoretical interpretation. Why? The wage rate was related to unemployment. Lipsey's explanation was in terms of an excess demand model. Okay, will you write it down? I want to clean my glasses. I can't see properly. Okay. So Lipsey started with a single labor market. You have different types of commodities. For each commodity, you have a different labor market, and he starts with by looking at one single labor market. Let us say it can be the labor market for IT products. It can be the labor market for FMCG, whatever. And he uses a neoclassical framework. That is, demand for and the supply, demand for labor, supply of labor are both functions of the real wage rate. No, sorry. The neoclassical theory assumes that demand and supply are functions of real wage. Lipsey, however, focused on the nominal or money wage in his model. So Lipsey departs from the neoclassical framework in that sense, in the functional sense. Okay. He assumes a competitive labor market, and for simplicity, demand curve and supply are both linear functions. Linearity is just a simplifying assumption, it's not very important. So, demand is a linear function of money wage rate, supply is a linear function of money wage rate, and they are normally sloped. Demand is negatively sloped and supply is positively sloped. And the equilibrium in the labor market is given by the point A, where the demand and supply curve intersect. So this is the starting equilibrium point, what you can see E0. N0 is the amount which is employed, and the money wage rate is W0. Okay. Now, when I'm talking about demand and supply of labor, these are planned demand and planned supply, not ex post or actual. These are ex ante demand, ex ante supply. Okay. So the point that I've indicated over here, A, it doesn't mean at this point ND is equal to NS. So that means ND minus NS is equal to 0. There's no excess demand in the labor market at point A. It doesn't mean that no one is unemployed. What you actually have is the labor supply. If you look at the labor supply, the planned labor supply is that you have decided to employ 1,000 persons. That is NS. But in reality, what you will have is maybe you will be able to employ only 950. And there will be 50 unfilled vacancies, 50 posts which are vacant. Okay. So 950 is the actual employment, 50 is the vacancies. But you have planned to have 1,000. NS is equal to ND, so that means there are 1,000 people who want to work. Out of them, a certain number, N, we know what it is 950. That is actually, they actually get the work. Okay. And you can have a certain amount of people who are looking for work but don't get the work. So excess demand for labor is simply ND minus NS. If we deduct these, we will get V minus U. Okay, so if the excess demand for labor is 0, that means that the number of people who are looking for work and the number of vacant posts is the same. Okay. It doesn't mean that all the people who want work, they are getting the work. Is this point clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So V is the amount of people who are actually seeking work at a particular point of time. See, the N means that I've filled up the posts. So the N doesn't really count here. V is the number of people who are looking for work. U is the number of vacant posts, right? So we can convert this into.
So, 1 second. So, isn't V the vacancies, like the number of vacancies, and U the number of people who are seeking work?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're right. Actually, আমি এটাকে labor demand বলে আমি করে দিচ্ছিলাম. Right, you're right. U is the number of people who are seeking work and V is the vacancies. Okay. So V minus U, this is the absolute level. We can easily convert this to rate terms. So that means we define X as X, which is the excess demand for labor, by that supply of labor. So that means it has to be V by NS, U by NS. And I'm denoting them by small letters, V minus U. Okay. So I'm coming back to the earlier figure. This is the initial equilibrium, W0, A, and N0. Suppose people start expecting that there's going to be a boom in the future. Producers believe that in the future period, demand is going to rise. So if they believe that demand is going to rise, then at the same wage rate, they will want to employ more workers so that they are able to meet the increase in demand. So that labor demand function shifts rightwards from ND to N1D. Okay. So initially, when the supply demand curve has changed, you simply have you're demanding more than what is supplied. W0 doesn't change immediately. So immediately what happens is you have an excess demand of AB at the going wage rate W0. What will happen over time is standard microeconomics, the wage rate will go up, the markets will clear. From A, you come back to this point, B. So what we have seen is that if there's excess demand for labor, this will lead to a rise in wages. Okay. Now suppose you have a very slight shift in this demand curve. Okay. The demand curve shifts rightwards, but only slightly. What will be the volume of this excess demand? Will it be large? It won't be large, right? The demand curve has shifted only slightly. So how much will the adjustment be? Let me just look at this diagram and see. Will there be a huge adjustment in that case? Again, no. So on the other hand, if suppose the demand curve shifts by a large amount, it really shifts outwards by a fairly large distance. So you have the volume of excess demand generated is pretty large. Again, there will be a wage adjustment, but now the wage adjustment will be larger. Basically, what I'm saying is, this is the original curve. See, this is the volume of excess demand. How much will price rise? Only by this amount. But suppose excess demand goes up by this amount. The demand curve shifts outward, huge excess demand. Now the increase in wage is much larger. Okay. So Lipsey introduced this proposition. If you have the more is the excess demand, the greater is the adjustment of wages. Okay, this is intuitive, clear from the diagram. Then he starts to formalize this. The change in money wage is proportional to excess demand. Okay. So he writes, this is the change in money wage, and this is the excess demand, and K is the factor of proportionality. K is positive. Okay. So W is, or rather, you can see the change in wage rate is equal to K into change in the excess demand. Okay. Okay. Now, we can observe wages. We know what wages are. So if we always observe wages, we simply require information on wages at 2 points to find out what is the change in wage rate. So wage and the change in wage rate, the information can be obtained easily. But can we observe excess demand? I mean, think about it. Why is excess demand not observable? Okay. And you'll find the answer if you read Frisch's book. But think about it. So this part we can write over here that on the horizontal axis we have excess demand for labor, and this is the change in wage rate. So the greater the excess demand, the greater is the change in the wage rate. Okay. Have you finished writing this? May I shift?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
The excess demand for labor. Okay, so what we have is we can observe. Sorry, I'll just go back. We can observe this part, but we don't know what is this part. Okay, this is not observable. The excess demand for labor, because it can't be observed, has to be captured by some proxy. Okay, so instead of excess demand, we have to use some indicator of the excess demand. Let us call this theta as a shorthand. So that means the relation between theta and excess demand are positively related. So now we have to look at the relation between the change in wage and theta. Okay. So what can be this theta? So there's a negative correlation between the excess demand for labor and the rate of unemployment on a priori grounds. Think about it, what I've said over here. If excess demand goes up, what will happen to unemployment? What is excess demand? The demand by the producers minus demand, the supply by the workers. Okay. So let us say
So
it was zero.
unemployment would decrease.
Yeah, I mean, we are hiring, the producer is hiring more workers.
Yes, sir.
So obviously, unemployment will fall. Is unemployment observable? Excess demand requires that we need to know ND, we need to know NS. Then only we can find out what is the rate of change in excess demand. But unemployment is something which is observed and measured. So now we have a good proxy for unemployment. Okay. We can say that if excess demand goes up, unemployment will fall. We don't know what is excess demand, but we can observe what is unemployment. So now we can say that if unemployment goes up, what happens to excess demand? It falls. If unemployment comes down, excess demand increases. We can capture we can capture excess demand using unemployment as a proxy. So if there's no excess demand, that means the number of unemployed, the number of people who are seeking jobs equals to the number of job vacancies. The X, that is excess demand, and U, that will cut the vertical axis. You can have something which is called frictional unemployment. Friction unemployment is basically that you're changing jobs. These are all a bit technical stuff in which we are seeing that, okay, you got the job, but it takes time to get the job. You haven't got the appointment letter. Even if you've got the appointment letter,
Sir, are you saying something?
ও কখন এটা হয়ে গেল? এটা muted।
স্যার আপনি আনএমপ্লয়েড বলছিলেন তখন।
কি করে হলো ওটা? যাই হোক, কোন জায়গাটা বলো তো, কোন পয়েন্টটা? এই স্লাইডটা থেকে না আগের থেকে?
এই স্লাইডটাই।
Yes, sir, from this slide only.
দিস ফ্রিকশনাল আনএমপ্লয়মেন্ট, নাকি আমি
No,
এই
sir.
স্লাইডটা রিপিট করব?
So we were talking about the excess demand, like how, like when excess demand increases, then when there's excess demand, the level of
ও
unemployment
এই জায়গাটা, এই
decreases.
লাস্ট এই পয়েন্টটা তো ফ্রিকশনাল
Yes.
আনএমপ্লয়মেন্টটা বলে দিয়েছিলাম।
Yes, sir.
ওকে ওকে, সো দ্য ফার্স্ট থিং ইজ this is U and this is the excess demand. And you have a point over here. This is UF. So what they said was that if excess demand increased, so I'm moving like this, unemployment will decrease. So the curve is like this. If there's an increase in excess supply, that is this will increase the rate of unemployment. So unemployment is going to go up like this. So that means the curve will be negatively sloped. Okay, what we have over here. Now we come to the nuances. It can be a straight line, it can be convex, concave. Okay, so what Lipsis said was that if you look at this part, if you look at this part, the excess supply part, it is linear. And this is supposed to be convex from below. If it is linear, the problem will be that even if it was linear, it would be like this, right? So that means even if excess demand is very high, a time will come when unemployment will become zero. That is something which is very unlikely to happen. So even if excess demand increases, unemployment will fall, but it will never become zero. In order to capture this part, we have a curved over here. Here there's no problem. It can go on until infinity. As excess supply increases, unemployment goes on increasing. But here, if we introduce linearity, we are going to have a problem. Okay. So now we have two types of relationships. We have So we have a relationship between U and excess demand. We have a relation between excess demand and change in wage rate. Okay. So W is related to X and X is related to U. The problem, as we had said, is X is not observable. But now if we can postulate a relation between, if we can postulate these two relationships, we can directly link W and U. Is it clear? This is a positive relation and this is a negative relation. Okay, so if unemployment goes up, what will happen to X?
It will fall.
Okay, what will happen to W? X and W is positively related.
It will again fall.
That is also going to fall. So now we don't want this part. So now we have this relation. An increase in U, fall in W, and vice versa. Okay. So now they combine the two equations and they get a curve for the Phillips curve. Okay, so you have this. This is the second relation between U and X, and this is simply converted to a relation between U and W. Okay. This X is replaced by W. So this is done for a single market. You have the same relation for all the different labor markets, and if you simply aggregate them, you are going to get the aggregate Phillips curve for the entire economy. Okay. So do you have any questions so far?
Sir, can you explain the problem of linearity in the excess supply case once more?
এইখানটা?
Yes, sir, নিচের দিকে পোর্শনটা।
I'm assuming that it is linear throughout. Right? If it is linear, then at some value, this curve, it's not a Phillips curve, but whatever, this curve will cut the y-axis, w-axis, sorry, এটা x হবে. Right?
Yes, sir.
সেটা আরো উপরে হতে পারে আর নিচে হতে পারে, that's it's not relevant. The important part is going to cut the x-axis. So it means that unemployment is 0. Okay, this is not feasible. All economies will have some amount of unemployment, at least frictional unemployment থাকবে. You'll have frictional unemployment, you can have zero unemployment is something which is not feasible in real terms. So that means we have to rule out this point. We have to rule out the fact, we have to rule out the possibility of this XU curve touching the vertical axis. এমনভাবে we have to draw this in such a way that the curve doesn't touch the x-axis. So how can you do it? If you make it curved, curve করলে কি হবে? It becomes asymptotic to the axis. if you make it convex, concave করলেও problem হবে, একই, you'll have the same problem, it's going to touch the vertical axis. But if you make it convex from below, then it will never touch the vertical axis. It will be asymptotic to the vertical axis. So that means if excess demand is going up, unemployment will fall, it will go on falling, but it will never be zero. Is it clear now?
Yes, sir. Clear.
আর নিচের দিকে কিন্তু কোনো প্রবলেম নেই, তোমার আনএমপ্লয়মেন্ট রেটটা তো বাড়তেই পারে। আচ্ছা, ওকে। Oh, made a mistake. দুটোর সময় কমান্ডটা চালিয়েছি, এখনো হয়ে যাচ্ছে। ওকে, so Samuelson, so this was the Phillips curve, and Lipsy provided an explanation of the Phillips curve. Okay. So if you think about it, this is a theory of inflation, right? But we haven't brought inflation into the picture. Unemployment is there, but unemployment was supposed to be related to inflation. What we have done is we have related this to the change in money wages. The Samuelson and Solo in a paper in 1960 brought in inflation or the price level. Okay. So they replaced the wage rate, changes in wage rate, by changes in the price level. And this generated what we can call the modern day Phillips curve. This is the final form of the Phillips curve. Now, how could they replace W by pi, which is the change in inflation rate? Okay, I mean, intuitively, again, it's somewhat clear that if wage rate is going to go up, you're going to have cost push inflation, right? So, a priori, I mean, intuitively, yeah, this Samuelson-Solo modification appears very attractive. But let's go into the theoretical structure. So we start from the markup theory. Remember the Klein's theory, which I had written? So price of a commodity is equal to 1 plus m, m is the markup, into this is the average cost. This is the total cost, this is quantity produced. Okay? This is not A, this is just a Greek sign. I don't know what it is. This is defined as NT minus by XT. Now, if you just bring the NT down, it will become the inverse of average productivity of labor. What is APL? APL is X by N, Q by L, right? Instead of Q by L, we are writing L by Q. So that means this is the inverse of average productivity of labor. So this NT by XT, we substitute this, whatever this is. We keep the W and we keep the markup plus. Now we take the log. So we have log PT, and this becomes log 1 plus M plus log W, log of this. We differentiate. Sorry, just 1 minute, please.
Sir, your microphone is off.
এটা কি অটো হয়ে যায় না কি বলো তো?
জানি না স্যার, মাঝে মাঝে বন্ধ হয়ে যাচ্ছে।
Okay, sorry. So we take 1 by p. We take log and then we differentiate. And in this form, we can replace this as pi equal to w minus lambda. Okay, so now we have it in rate terms. So that means inflation rate equals to is the difference between the growth in money wages and the rate of growth in labor productivity. See this term, this is actually related to APL. So that's why we can say it's the growth in labor productivity. So now we have is a relation between the relation was between W and U. So now over from here, we have a relation between W and pi. So again, we do the linking. Samuelson and Solow linked up inflation and U. Okay. So let's look at this linking now. So we assume that a Phillips curve has the following form. Wage is equal to, so this is the Phillips curve which the original Phillips curve, W on unemployment. So W is equal to, let us say, pi star expected rate of inflation plus B, this is U inverse plus beta into lambda. Okay. The rate of change in money wages depends upon expected rate of inflation. This is the degree of demand pressure given by unemployment, and this is the growth of labor productivity. Okay, so instead of W, we can, W is equal to pi minus lambda. So we can simply put over here pi minus lambda, or rather over here we simply put in the value of W over here. So this part will remain same, this will become 1 minus beta lambda. Okay, this is just a basic algebraic, simple algebra. So inflation, rate of inflation depends upon expected rate. This is very important, as you will see in the latter formulations. Demand pressure in the labor market, the excess demand for labor measured by in terms of using unemployment, and this is the productivity, growth rate of labor productivity. So if the labor productivity is growing, then it should actually be transferred to the workers. They are more productive and they should get the benefit for it. But this is the part that is not going to the workers. You can see that this is some measure of exploitation of the workers, if you want to bring in exploitation. I'm sure that Solow, Samuelson would turn over in the graves, but still. And greater this component, okay, the lower is the inflation rate. So that means if lambda goes up, the curve is going to shift down. So it's better if I draw it over here. So that means this is the Phillips curve. If lambda goes up, the curve is going to come down. So,
Sir, could you show the previous slide once? Thank you, sir.
okay. So the Samuelson-Solow paper had two contributions. The first contribution was they linked unemployment rate to inflation rate. Okay. So now you have the modern day Phillips curve, pi and u. The second was the policy implications of this. You can think of each point on the policy on this Phillips curve as a policy option. So the policymaker has the option of choosing a point on this curve. The problem is that policymakers would like to reduce inflation and unemployment. Solo and Samuelson pointed out that you cannot do both simultaneously. You have to, there's a trade-off between them, and if you have to choose a balance between these two considerations. If you are prepared to accept a high rate of inflation, you can reduce unemployment. But if you feel that price levels are going up, shooting up, you need to control inflation, then you will have to accept unemployment. Okay, so that is why they use the term purchase. They can purchase. Unemployment is the cost of reducing inflation. If you want to keep inflation down, you have to pay a price, and the price is in terms of higher unemployment. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just discuss this slide, and I'll tell you some. I'll just digress a little bit, which will be completely off the course, and then I'll take leave today. So let us assume that for a long period of time, prices have been rising at a rate of 4% per annum, and the unemployment rate was in the neighborhood of 7.5%. Okay, as you can see over here. So that means 7.5 and inflation is 4. Okay. The government feels that 7.5 is too much, and they decide that, okay, I'm going to go for an expansionary policy. Either spend more and then finance it through money supply. So they start spending money. So now this is a basically Keynesian type argument, and the multiplier will have a impact. Okay, it is going to increase the demand, and the increase in demand, investment in productive capacity is going to reduce the rate of unemployment, right? But at the same time, if you think about the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves, what will happen? This is AD and this is AS. AD has gone up. So although unemployment has gone up, you're going to have higher prices. Prices is going to go up from here to here. So what happens is you have reduced unemployment to 3%, but inflation will occur. The increase in prices goes up from 4 to 8%. Okay. So basically what Samuelson and Solo was saying, that you can move along the Phillips curve. You can choose your appropriate
So we can hear you.
Okay. You have made me a nervous wreck. So basically what happens is you can choose a particular point, a combination of inflation and unemployment, and through appropriate policy, you can move along the Phillips curve to that point. You can move to B, you can also move down like this. If inflation, you can contain inflation, whatever. Okay, so if you adjust the aggregate demand curve through appropriate monetary or fiscal policy, you can move to an alternative point on the Phillips curve. This is what is called this is what we call Friedman and Phelps called the Neve-Phillips curve, and this is the policy implications. So in terms of the course, I'll end over here, but I'll just digress one point. If you just some information, I used to teach this before. So this theory that you can choose between inflation and unemployment and move along the Phillips curve was motivated a paper by Nordhaus. I think it was an American Economic Review in 1971, I think. What Nordhaus said was that you have two targets. You want to lower inflation. You also want to lower unemployment. But the Phillips curve says that we cannot do both. Okay. So now Nordhaus brought in the politics. In every democracy, you have periodic elections. So this is the first election. This is the second election after, let us say, 4 or 5 years. Then every 5 years, you have elections. Okay. So now a government has come to power. Initially, what they do is the focus is on containing inflation. So they want to keep inflation down. And they realize that given Phillips curve, this is a necessary cost of their policy. In an attempt to contain inflation, they have to accept a high rate of unemployment. Okay, so initially what you have is, you have low inflation and high unemployment. Then, when you are approaching the re-election period, you are approaching E2, 1 year is left. You want to keep the people happy. Now what happens is, see, unemployment is a very bad indicator. It can really reduce your popularity. Okay, so now the focus, this becomes the focus, unemployment. And when the unemployment becomes the focus, again they realize that, okay, we can't keep prices down, prices will rise. So this becomes the cost of reducing unemployment. So now in this phase, you have high inflation and low unemployment. Okay. So again, in this period, what will you happen? You are re-elected. So now you start focusing, you shift your focus back to inflation. So it is again low inflation and high unemployment. Here again, you have got high inflation. You want to be re-elected, so you again go back to focusing on unemployment. So if you look at it over time, you will see that if these are the election periods, if you're talking about prices will be low, they will rise over here, it will be like this. Unemployment will take the opposite end. Sorry, they will be high then they will fall over here, then again it will be high, it will fall. Okay. So Nordhaus called this the political business cycle. But this is, I just to end the discussion. So I am ending at this point, and in the next part, I'm going to go for the natural rate of unemployment and the Friedman Phelps criticism of this. Of the Lipsey Solo Samuelson model. Okay, so is there any question, or will I close the lecture?